guys have had these Reddit stories pop up on your TikTok feed, but whenever they popped up on my feed, they always make me sleepy, so I thought to make an ASMR version of it. I might bring in this cork thing, I don't know what it's called, placemat maybe, for some background noise. I might add in some plucking or personal attention as I'm reading. So we're just gonna get started with our first story. So the title of the first one is called It Wasn't a Little Girl. It starts off by saying, I was camping with my husband and his family at a small remote lake in New Mexico. There were about 10 people in our group and another group of 6 people in the next campsite. It was nighttime and both groups were doing typical activities, making s'mores, having a few drinks, and telling stories, when all we heard was what sounded like a little girl yelling out for help. Neither group had children with them, but we were all positive we were hearing a little girl and decided to search the area we had heard the noises from together. There was a field behind our campsite, and we all saw a very tall, pure white figure standing maybe 100 feet away from us in the field, making noises. We all agreed this thing looked about maybe 6 feet tall, skinny and white as can be. We made our way closer to investigate, but whatever it was that we saw started backing off as we got closer, and it disappeared into the trees. All night we continued to hear a little girl calling for help as we tried to sleep. And that's the end of the first story. That was not as interesting as I thought it would be. Okay, the second story. I'm a psychiatric nurse, and early in my career, I worked at a residential mental health facility. One of our residents was an elective mute, which means that he didn't, wouldn't, couldn't talk, but there were no medical reasons as to why. He had spoken earlier in his life and in fact seemed quite normal back then, with the exception of being close to 7 feet tall. He'd been raised in the deep south and joined the military when he was 19, but one night he vanished. He was declared AWOL, and eventually he was declared missing and dead. 10 years later, a 7-foot tall man walked medications were tried, but they did not affect him either positively or negatively. Occupational therapy did nothing because Marion would just grin, and unless told to stay put, he'd get up and start pacing again. On my last day at that job, the last thing I saw was Marion pacing in the parking lot, throwing his head back to laugh. Later, I wondered if all along I'd been dealing with a ghost. All these years later, I still don't know. And that's the end of that story. The third one goes, its title is The Unrest Stop. I was driving across country with my mom and sister when I was 16 and my sister was 20. It was late, but we were well rested and still alert. We were driving along an interstate and needed gas and a bathroom break, so we stopped at the only rest stop in 200 miles. There was a van full of teenagers on a road trip at the gas station, as well as a small gray car parked at the pump in front of us with two young men standing still outside of it. When we got there, everything felt wrong. We'd been on the road for days and seen many rest stops at night and had never been afraid until then. My mom and sister went inside and I stayed in the car. I heard the teenagers say they were creeped out and couldn't get the pump to work, and they left in a hurry. I was watching the car in front of us, and the two men had not moved at all, not an inch. They weren't talking, they weren't on phones, they were just standing there, still as stone. My sister and mom came running back out to the car, and when they got in, the two men slowly turned to look at us, while not moving or pivoting the rest of their bodies. And I swear, we all saw the same thing. They had eyes dark as pitch and empty, truly empty, not black, not reflecting any light at all, just a void. We sped out of there and didn't stop until we were in the next city. The worst thing about the entire experience, we couldn't find the place on any map. We knew exactly which spot on the interstate to look, and we couldn't find it on Google Maps or any paper map we had. We even asked locals about the creepy gas station out on that stretch of road and got only confused looks. We've traveled on that interstate since, and there is no rest stop. That's creepy. Okay. The next story is titled It Came for Us in the Graveyard. Doing this video at night probably wasn't the smartest idea. Okay, so the story starts. We were driving my friend's really old beat-up Subaru through a massive graveyard. We stopped and walked down a hill and came across a little pond. There was someone sitting on a rock on the other side of the pond. The figure was all black and we couldn't make out any features other than the fact that it looked like a man who was wearing some old style top hat. We stupidly waved and shouted hi. He didn't show any acknowledgement and continued sitting still on the rock. All of a sudden he jumped on his feet, started running to us on the water, and then vanished into thin water about halfway on the pond. My friends and I screamed and ran back to the car. The car wouldn't start, and we heard something banging on the back of the car. It wasn't a constant bang, but every 27, I went to my high school reunion. I flew into the nearest airport and rented a car. The distance was about 35 miles through a very rural and almost abandoned part of the country. About 3 miles outside of town, I see someone on the side of the road flagging me down. It turned out that it was one of the guys I had attended school with. Jim gets in the car and we started talking. I had not seen him in 20 years, but he still looked the same, maybe a little bit older. We get to town and I ask him if he wants to come to the VFW and have a drink. He says no, just take me home. Jim's parents had lived only a few blocks from my grandmother's house, and I turned in that direction, but he said to take him to the outskirts of town. There was a mobile home park out there, and I figured that's where he lived. When we reached the end of the turn, he said, just drop me off here. It was good to see you again, and he walks off into the night. I go to the VFW, met some of my old classmates. We start to talk, and as we are talking about who's coming to the reunion, I mentioned that I had just picked up Jim 3 miles east of town and had dropped him off. Everyone gets quiet. Even the guy singing karaoke stops and lays down the mic. My cousin goes white as a new t-shirt. Barb, Jim died on that curve 8 years ago. Rolled his car. We were all at his funeral, I was told. I started to feel really dizzy and I went out to the car to take some deep breaths. There on the seat is the local newspaper, printed 8 years previous, containing Jim's obituary. I still have the paper. Someone take Reddit away from me. I can't stop reading ghost stories. That's an interesting ending. Okay. The next one is Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. After we moved into our home, we were told a woman had died there at the hands of her abusive husband. She hated men. My dad would wake up with scratches all over himself, and whenever my brother was mean to my sister or I, he would have scratches on him as well. One day, my brother hurt our sister. He hit her with something. When he woke up later that night, he had a horrible bloody nose. The day we moved out, my brother accidentally broke his twin's arm trying out a wrestling move. He swears that he would have died that night if it wasn't for our last night in the house. The next story is Death Came From Him, For Him. I was standing in my parents' room, talking to my very sick dad at the time. He was dying of stage 4 esophageal cancer. I got the feeling something was behind me. I looked towards the doorway to the living room, and something was about 4'6" and fully black, is peeking around the corner with its hands on the door frame. I ran towards it, and it slipped back around the door. When I got outside of the doorway, there was nothing. My dad was completely confused when I stepped back inside the room. When I tell him, people who stayed at my house in my dad's final days claim to have seen it. My mom saw the figure on multiple occasions in multiple places said loudly, "You've got it, bud." We moved out 2 days later and stayed with family. The old lady who owned the place died a few months later, and the house was torn down. It is still an empty lot to this day, nothing but grass and a tree. I still drive by it every now and again. Okay, there's a few more stories left. I think that there's 2 more, but we're just going to end at that. Like I said before, this website with all of the stories is linked in the description box below if you want to go check that out. I'm probably gonna do another one of these Reddit stories. I personally really like these Reddit stories. Not sure how I feel about these ghost ones, considering I'm filming this at night and it's giving me the heebie-jeebies, but yeah, I don't know, I might do like a funny one next time, or like just strange stories instead of scary ones. But yeah, I hope that you guys like this video, like this little chit chat session. If it is daytime for you, I hope that you have a wonderful day. If it is nighttime for you, I hope that this video helped you to relax, and that you are able to get yourself a good night's rest. And I will see you guys in the next video.